Hi guys, so it took me an hour and 26 minutes to make this prototype, and I admit that it was much easier to make this because this cork doesn't require any finishing on the edges. You can turn your seam or you can just sew this on. And so while I've been hesitant to show this kind of extended tab because of the raw edges that need to be finished, I really enjoy doing it with this cork because it's really just a matter of taping it on. And so here you see how I really work. I'm just figuring it out as I go along, and I'm starting with these zipper tabs, and I really don't know what I'm going to make. I have an idea that it's just going to be a regular little pouch with boxed corners and an extended tab with only a 1-inch tab so that the tabs are very small, because I don't like it when you unzip a bag to get into it and it's very hard to get inside the bag and see in there to see what you're looking for. And so I want the tiny little tabs. And so this video will show all the setup and the changing between things. But I think it's important to note that it only took an hour and 26 minutes to make this first bag, and that's everything but tacking the petals. And so I'm just seeing how this stuff behaves by trying it out, seeing if I can sew straight on it, seeing if how big my stitch seems to need to be. If you notice on the gold fleck cork, there's a really nice big gold stripe at the top, and I wanted to actually make that the front of my bag, and I ended up accidentally putting it on the back. And so I was a little bummed when I discovered that, but it's still nice on the back. It just would have been nice to have it on the front too. But so here I am just figuring out how, the zipper will be best, and I decide to trim the edges like I do in the finished tutorial. And so I'm just going to get this zipper installed. I decide not to turn the fabric at the zipper because I'm trying to preserve this gold. And I should have known right here that this was the back, because I do tend to like my zipper head to be on the, if you're looking at the front of the bag, on the left hand side, and so I'm actually putting it on the back right here. Now this to me is funny because I didn't know I did it at the time. I'm planning to stitch both sides twice, and I stitch this one and then I start thinking about other things about the bag construction, and I completely forget to stitch the other 3 lines that I'm planning to stitch until much later in the video when I'm ready to close the bag and it's falling apart on me. But so that's one of the things that happens when you're creating, is you're thinking about so many things, you're thinking so many steps ahead that you don't necessarily know what you're doing. Now this piece here is 28 inches long, and here I am deciding that the best course of action is to make the bag for this tutorial or this prototype using half of that length, so that I can make the final tutorial using the other half. And I hadn't already decided that before I sewed it on here, because when I'm working I often just start somewhere and see how things behave and then make decisions as I go along. But so here I've cut it in half, and so I have a 14 by 12 inch piece, and I'm trying to figure out, is there any way I could put this zipper in? Sometimes you can do it with fabric and make a tube like this, depending on various things, but I decide that I really need to cut this at the bottom to make this work out. And so I do that, and my mat is a little off camera. I need to shoot wide for this type of thing where I'm going to shoot end to end, because there's just really no way that I can do all the close-ups that I try to do in the tutorial. But if you want to see exactly and all I'm doing is squaring up here, it's not at all interesting. It's just a matter of, I probably should have squared up the piece I bought, and I was dealing with the way it came off the fabric store's cutting mat, and which is usually not completely square. It's a little bit off. And so here I am exploring the tape, and I tape the second side, and remember I've only stitched one side on the back now. And now here I start playing with what else am I going to do? And I decide I'm going to cut some decorative, what I end up calling waves for the purpose of the tutorial, so that people can distinguish one piece from another. It helps to name things. And so these are my waves, and I'm just, designing. I'm just, what do I think of that? Do I like that? I'm setting it on there, trying to see if I like it. And I decide to sew them on. And see, I've completely blown past the part where you would finish sewing your zipper. And to me it's just humorous, because we do these things, and then we watch, if we film ourselves. I never had any idea what I look like working, but here I filmed myself working, and this is what I really look like when I'm trying to figure something out and decide the best way. So I attempt to match these up so they'll match front and back, and I don't do very much marking, and I end up with one of them is pretty far off and one of them's pretty close, and that's why I actually use a little bit more marking and a little bit more tape on the tutorial, because when I just sort of put it on there, I noticed that one of my ends was pretty far off, which doesn't bother me that much, and I would certainly put that out in a booth, but I could see if someone ordered something like that online and it came in the mail and didn't match up, they might be kind of disappointed. You'd have to show that in your pictures. In this video, I don't have to make my curls or my flower center, because I'd already cut them as part of the little teaser at the end of the stuffed flowers video. And so I just tape on the curls that I have, and I'm figuring out how I like them. And I am using basting tape for the first time here. The only time I ever used it at all before was to tape these curls at the end of the stuffed flowers video. And so this is just me figuring out, do I like this notion that has come out. I would have used this my whole life if it had existed. I don't think I would use it a lot all the time, but there would be, I'm sure, certain tasks where finding the basting tape and using it was worth the trouble to make things turn out just the way you wanted. And so I've got these on, and I decide just on the fly that I'm just going to stitch them on a little bit, and so I do that, and that seems to work pretty well. And I'm just doing it. I'm just figuring it out. I can see now that I place my bunch of curls a lot closer than I do in the final tutorial, which is fine. When I make things that are similar, if I have a design and do them over and over, I don't really make an attempt to have them all exactly the same. I play up more the aspect of they're one of a kind. It's a design, but then each one is made individually, and they all have their own personality and are all slightly different. And this is a different situation because my flower is left over from a long time ago. It has all this felt on the back, and so I first tack on the flower part in the center using the buttonhole type of stitching. It's slightly different from a real button sewn on, and then I'm zigzagging it on under petals and behind the layers, trying to do essentially the same thing that I did in the other video where I did it in pieces, but here I'm just getting behind one layer and I'm sewing it on in places that aren't going to show once the button is put on, because I want it really attached. I don't want it to be something where if that caught on something, there would be a real tendency for the cork to have to rip because it was only attached in a very small areas. And if your thread wasn't the thing to give, it could easily be then your cork. And so I'm just playing with this, and now I'm pinning back my petals to keep them away from my seams, which is something you should always do, keep stuff out of your seams, because you'll sew it in there. I think I do it here somewhere and have to pull back. Now, did you see that? I was just figuring out, there I was about to close my seam when I realized, oh, I didn't finish sewing the zipper, which like I say, I think that's hilarious. And now here I go, even though I pinned my petals the other way, here I go, la-di-da-di-da, I'm sewing down this zipper, and my petals are sticking up. and I don't even think about it because now I just got to get this zipper put in here. So I'm sewing down here and blithely going along, and I'm caught. And now I've got to get this, and I'm cutting it out, and I'm like, oh no, this is the finished top stitching, and it may not look that good. But you know, my thread color is so close to the dark part of the cork that once I get this all picked out and pulled out, I find that I can go back and just do a little back stitch and restitch that area. And because the problem was that petal that stuck up there, the petal is actually gonna stick over that tiny little correction, and I don't think it's very visible because of the closeness in color of my taupe thread to the taupey looking dark parts of the cork. And so now I'm doing my second row of stitching on each side, and I do think it looks really pretty. The cork is really pretty when it's stitched, whether or not you turn your edge. I think turning the edge puts a little bit more stress on the top of the cork, but it seems to be very pliant and very, you know, just easy to manipulate and easy to get to conform to your desires. And I ran out of bobbin thread there, and so here I am finishing that stitching. So I actually have to do a little break in my stitching on both sides, and so I'm checking that to make sure I'm okay with it. And here I am now going to finally close the bag, and so I do that and get all set up and decide to do a pretty small seam, and so I'm switching feet again and setting my seam allowance, and then I'm going to sew down that and get that edge the way I want. Like I said before, I don't really think pinning cork is the best idea, but you could pin it in your seam allowance pretty easily if you wanted, and face your pins so that you could pull them before you got there. And that's one of those things where I always wonder, should I just show people the way I really do it, or should I show them the way that they could do it if they can't? And that would have probably been a good thing to show. I didn't think of it until now, that you could pin your seam allowance with the pin parallel to the seam. And so now I'm turning it out just to decide if I like it. And here I am discovering that while my wave matches up pretty good on one side, it doesn't match at all on the other end. Then I turn it back in because I think I'm pretty happy with it. And that was my first experience turning cork and figuring out that it is not the best thing in the world. And so I trimmed those little edges a little bit because I noticed that I didn't like that the best, and I thought my bottom could be squared up a little better, so I just trimmed that off. And then I sew the bottom, and then here I am trying to figure out what I'm going to do with this bag. And I just decide as a snap decision to kind of curve these, which I often do. And so once I get this all properly positioned and I check inside and make sure that I like the way that it looks, I just put it in and I just, you know, eyeball it and sew this kind of curved. And I didn't sew this first bag stitching twice, and it was because I didn't do that that I decided that I wanted to recommend it in the second video, because I noticed when you look down in the corner of the bags you can kind of see daylight through the corners, and I thought, because it's such a stiff material, and I thought that I would really prefer a double row of stitching to close up the bag and to sew these bottom corners. And so that's what I show and recommend in the video for the tutorial. But so here I am, just boxing it up, turning it out, discovering that, you know, it really is, it squeaks and everything else you heard in the other video. It's funny when it turns out. But it's so pretty, and see my really nice gold stripe in the back. I wish that gold stripe had been across the front, but I guess it does dress the back of the bag up a little bit. And so there it is, and I've got it, and I primp it and play with it a little bit, and I did kind of burnish the insides of these seams with the end of a kind of a piercing tool that I have that's for leather working. And I always try to look up and make sure the camera's still filming. It's always so disappointing when I look up and the camera's been off for an indeterminate amount of time, and I have to check and figure out how I can reshoot what didn't get filmed. And so I'm just, I think, I'm not sure, looking for the button. I really like that big button, but I'm going to use the one that's black because it kind of ties in with the black zipper. And I experiment with, well, maybe I can tape this on and take a picture of it with it stuck on there before I've hand sewn it on. And I try that, and it doesn't it doesn't work. I'm looking around for something I can use to hook that on for a picture. I decide to find my buttonhole twist because I know I have black, and I think that's the best one to go with for this black button, is the weight of the buttonhole twist. And so I'm going to really quick sew this on, and the reason I decide to show it with the pliers handy in the tutorial is because when I'm doing this here, it's just harder than it should be, and I finally get my thimble out, but then I wish I had also my pliers. And I did a better job making the little flower part for this prototype than I did for the tutorial. But it's one of those things where you don't do things the same and you don't necessarily remember how you did it, and that's why I sometimes think it takes making something 5 or 6 or a dozen times before everything clicks in your brain and you start going, oh, I'll do it like this all the time because this is what gives me the result that I like the best. But you don't necessarily know what you're going to like the best until you've done it, and sometimes done it a bunch of times. I hope this is helpful, guys. This is what I have to show you on making this prototype. Thanks so much.